Welcome to this presentation from the Spokane Walleye Club. This is cold water trolling and it's March 27th, 2021. My name is Greg Cook and I've been a member with the Spokane Walleye Club for about 14 years. Cold water trolling, the time frame of the year that I'm talking about here, when I find these tactics to be quite effective, usually start somewhere in mid-February and go through the middle to latter part of March. In eastern Washington, we're generally talking about water temperatures in the mid-30s to the mid-40s during this time frame. Our water clarity in our reservoirs can be highly variable during this time of year, depending on how much rain and snowmelt we have in the region. And this is a time of year when we're often talking about melting snow from our nearby mountains entering the water system as well. This is a diagram that I've used frequently in presentations that I've delivered in the past, and it's an attempt to explain walleye behavior in the Pacific Northwest. Water temperature is a big driver in how a fish behaves and its metabolism. So we have cool colors here for the water temperature during the colder times of the year, and warmer colors when we're expecting warmer temperatures and more walleye activity. But in general, you can break this graph down into two main activities that walleyes experience during the year, and that's when walleyes are scattering, and this typically occurs when we have warm water temperatures and forage is abundant in our systems. This is often when fish will scatter out, seeking opportunities to find food. During the colder water months, walleyes will often have a slower metabolism, they'll be less aggressive, and they tend to school up in areas that benefit them for easy meal opportunities. And we'll talk about some of these areas in this presentation. Go into a little bit more detail about the winter time frame. This is generally in the December through March months out here in eastern Washington. As we mentioned, fish are often schooled up this time of year. Walleyes relate to winter staging areas in our lakes and reservoirs, and I will describe what I mean by those staging areas later in the presentation. But I think the most important thing to think about when fishing in the winter or cold water months is that walleyes are in energy conservation mode. Their metabolism is low. They don't want to move or migrate a whole lot to find meals, so that really dictates where they position within a reservoir system. Once the month of April rolls around, walleyes begin to move to spawning areas, and this often occurs during the month of April, sometimes beginning as early as late March. Males are often the first to start this migration to spawning grounds, and females will generally follow a couple of weeks later. River and current play an important role in a walleye's spawning grounds, and we'll talk about where walleyes will stage in river current breaks later in this presentation. The act of spawning typically occurs in late April or early May in the inland Northwest. Gravel or rubble bottoms are an important part of the spawning substrate in a reservoir, so those are areas that you would seek out for looking for spawning fish. Moderate river current or wind-blown shoals is an important aspect of a walleye's spawning behavior. A walleye's eggs rely on river current to oxygenate the eggs. Walleyes are unique in this aspect compared to other fish species like crappies or bass. Crappies or bass will often have adults tend to the nest as the eggs are incubating, and the fanning of a fish's tail will help to oxygenate the eggs. With a walleye, that does not occur. Both the male and the female will abandon the eggs once they are laid on this gravel or rubble bottom, and it's up to the current to oxygenate those eggs. The typical spawning duration, according to the books that I've read, is about 1 to 2 weeks. That's considering decent conditions that are in place during that time frame. And the water temperature generally is in the mid to upper 40s when the act of spawning begins out here in the west. So in summary, from February to April, let's talk about the movements of a walleye. In wintertime, we're often looking for wide parts of the main lake. We don't want a lot of current in these areas. Walleyes don't want to fight the current or expend the energy. And usually we're looking for areas in the vicinity of big flats. These big flats can provide opportunities for walleyes to migrate upon and feed uh, when they feel the urge to find something to eat. As we move into the pre-spawn period, this is usually in late March into April, there's a migration to the spawning sites, and walleyes will often stage near current breaks as they begin to move up the river system. Once the spawn begins, often in late April or into early May, both the males and the females will be moving up the spawning rivers, and they will often relate to shallow current breaks as they prepare for the spawn. In general, during this entire time frame from February to April, walleyes are schooling, but they are moving. So that schooling and moving behavior is one thing that has led me to believe that locating walleyes with slow trolling techniques is an efficient way to find fish and find fish that are willing to bite. Let's talk about how this presentation relates to Lake Roosevelt. Lake Roosevelt is in northeast Washington, and it is pretty near Spokane, is one of the most popular fishing destinations for folks in the Spokane Walleye Club. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Lake Roosevelt is about 150 river miles long. It extends from the Canadian border all the way to Grand Coulee Dam. This Columbia River Reservoir is important for power generation. One of its main purposes is flood control, and it also provides irrigation to the Columbia Basin Irrigation Project. Walleyes thrive in Lake Roosevelt. They are not native to this river system, but they sure do spawn well and produce lots of fish that propagate through the system and even downstream of Grand Coulee Dam. Some of the important tributaries that we'll mention here briefly are the Kettle River, which is up north near the Canadian border, the Sandpoil River, which is close to Grand Coulee Dam, and the most significant tributary that contributes the most water to the Columbia River system, other than the Columbia River, is the Spokane Arm or Spokane River that feeds Lake Roosevelt down by the community of Lincoln. So winter staging areas. You can often find these spots on maps by looking for the widest parts in the main lake. These wide parts of the main lake are generally areas that experience less current, which is good in the wintertime. Walleyes are not looking to fight a lot of current in the winter. And these wide areas in the river also generally are located near big flats areas. And these flats are important because walleyes will often move up onto these shallower flats to look for forage during the winter time. As we move into the month of March and pre-spawn, we often see some migration begin where walleyes will begin to leave these winter staging areas and move closer to spawning sites. Not all of the walleyes will move to the mouth of the Spokane River. Some walleyes may spawn near the Kettle River, the Sandpoil, or some of the other tributaries within the system. But local biologists believe that the lion's share of walleyes in the system do spawn in the Spokane arm of Lake Roosevelt. By the time we get to late March and into early April, a relatively high concentration of walleyes, or at least mature walleyes in the entire system, are contained near the mouth of the Spokane arm of Lake Roosevelt or within the arm of Lake Roosevelt, and that's what I have with the congregation of the walleyes on this map. And this generally it occurs in late March into early April. So let's take a look at that yellow box that I had highlighted in that map, and here is the confluence of the Columbia River, or the main lake of Roosevelt, and the Spokane Arm. The Spokane Arm is about 45 miles long. Little Falls Dam is the last dam on the Spokane River before the river enters Lake Roosevelt. As far as the spawning sites for Lake Roosevelt, this is where I believe the majority of the spawning occurs, in the Spokane Arm, and that's highlighted in this green shaded area here. I also have a yellow dashed line which symbolizes where the current generally in the spring begins to increase rather significantly, as the river is relatively bottlenecked from Little Falls Dam until you get to about the Porcupine Bay vicinity in the Spokane Arm. This area that I have shaded also has an abundance of gravel or sandy bottom, which is ideal for walleye habitat for spawning. So in my mind, I was going to make a conceptualization of what I believe the walleye migration would be like in a typical year. So in early March, a lot of these walleyes are kind of in between winter staging areas and beginning to migrate towards the confluence of the Columbia and the Spokane Arm. So in this particular illustration, I have an example of where a lot of the fish are still in the main lake, but some of the smaller fish, and including some of the males, may be starting to move upstream, but haven't quite yet staged in the current where the spawning would be occurring. As we get into early April and water temperatures are beginning to get into the low to mid 40s typically, we'll often see more of the males beginning to move upstream. Typically, the mature females will lag a week or two behind these males as they begin to work up the system towards the current areas. And by late April, this is often when the peak spawning period is occurring. A lot of the mature fish in the system, both males and females, will be up in the spawning areas, and this is generally where the current is the most favorable. The substrate is good, and we often see higher concentrations of these adult fish in the act of spawning well upstream in the Spokane Arm. Also wanted to mention that there are lots of immature fish that haven't reached sexual maturity in the system as well. And a lot of these fish are typically about 17 inches or less, and it's hard to tell whether they're males or females if you catch them. And some of these fish exhibit behaviors of older fish, while others will perhaps languish in winter staging areas or not quite make the full migration to the spawn. So in summary, from February to early April, there are schools of walleyes within the main lake and in the Spokane Arm of Lake Roosevelt. They are frequently moving as they get ready for the spawn and move up the arm. And the walleye's behavior will vary not only on the sex of the fish, but also the maturity of the fish. So that, in my mind, makes it a good idea to cover a lot of water while you're fishing for walleyes, and slow trolling techniques or any kind of trolling technique will allow you to cover a lot of water and find fish, locate them, and then target them. So bottom bouncer trolling is a very popular technique here in eastern Washington that involves the use of a bottom bouncer, which is just a weight with a wire that's running through it. It's a relatively snagless presentation. We have a lot of boulders, snags in their systems out here, so a bottom bouncer helps alleviate some of that snagging. My preference is to use heavy line, 20-pound braided line. The braid has less stretch than monofilament or fluorocarbon, and that braid allows you to feel a walleye's light take during this time frame of early in the year. Sometimes walleyes bites are so subtle in the cold water time frame that you may have a fish and not even know it. What I like to use for my leaders or my snell is 15-pound monofilament or fluorocarbon. Uh, that has a lower visibility than your braid, has a little bit of stretch, and is generally a cheaper alternative to using braided line. Um, and then we can use a variety of different spinner types, and I'll go into a little bit more detail with what the spinners are. And a night crawler added to this presentation is the bait that we use to entice the bites. So bottom bouncer trolling, it's a strength for covering water efficiently. Bottom bouncer trolling is also a way where you can change your depth quickly just by letting out more line or pulling line in. You can also swap out the weight on your bottom bouncers pretty easily. Bottom bouncer trolling is also a great way to work water when it's windy, and we do get our fair share of wind in eastern Washington, and Lake Roosevelt can be quite wind prone in a lot of the system. And it's a way to maintain bottom contact in deep water when it is windy, when other presentation types like jigging or blade baits can be quite difficult to fish during the wind. As far as the troll speed that I prefer during the cold water periods, I like to keep my troll speed around 0.5 miles per hour. That is what I've found will get me the most bites. You go a little bit faster than that, you may be going by fish. Slower than that, it may be not fast enough to get action on your bait or to entice bites. At this speed of 0.5 miles per hour, I like about a 1 ounce bottom bouncer for a 15-foot depth, an ounce and a half or 25 feet, and 2 to 3 ounces if I'm going deeper than that in 35 to 45 feet. As far as trolling with the current, and we typically do have some element or aspect of current in our reservoirs and rivers. If I'm trolling with the current, I will add 0.5 miles per hour to the current speed. So in this example, if there's 0.4 miles per hour of current on the river, I will add 0.5 to it and come up with a trolling speed of 0.9 miles per hour. Typically, I prefer to troll with the current because the orientation of the fish has their head upstream, and typically I prefer to troll my bait in the direction where a walleye can see it from a distance and have the opportunity to react to it. Buoyancy plays a big role in your trolling rig selection. I prefer to have something that will troll and be positively buoyant or close to neutrally buoyant when I'm slow trolling. Heavy baits like Colorado spinners or metal spinners can sometimes be too heavy for a slow trolling presentation. You end up just dragging that presentation on the bottom. It's more you're more prone to snagging, and you also don't have that bait up in the fish's strike zone as effectively. Here is an option that I use quite frequently when I'm trolling in this cold water time of the year. I like a Max Smile Blade lure, and a slow death hook is often a very good option. It gives you some action to your presentation even at slow speeds. And these are some of the colors that I like to have on hand when I'm slow trolling in the cold water time frame. Greens are often a very effective color, especially if there's a little bit of stain in the water. Orange and black is another good option when there's some stain in the water. That black can really stand out when the water's dingy in color. Silver is or chrome is a very good option on Lake Roosevelt with some of the forage that we have out here. Pinks and purples are often highly effective too, especially in clear water and in deep water. Those colors maintain their vibrancy as you get into deeper depths. Other options, pill floats along with a slow death rig can be a really good combination. Floating lures and double hook harnesses can be very good. At times, double hook harnesses will outproduce a slow death hook. You just have to try both presentations throughout the day and see which one is the most effective. If you're going to use something with stack beads or any type of weight to it, it may be good to consider adding some air to your night crawler with a worm blower. That can help keep that or increase that buoyancy of your presentation and keep it up in the water column just a little bit. And there are times on Lake Roosevelt, especially if I'm fishing for the undersized fish in a school of juvenile walleyes, which can often be the best eating type, the 15 to 17 inchers. You may not even need an entire night crawler with this presentation, and a lot of times in the cold season, I'm only using a half a crawler on my slow death hook or my double hook harness. Other slow trolling options other than a smile blade or the butterfly blade from Northland Fishing Tackle. Cabela's prop blades, these are metal. I don't see a lot of people using them, but I've found that they are quite useful. They're light, even though they are metal. And you'll want to get the bigger size, the size 3 or the size 4. The size 1s and 2s are very small. Warden's Wobble and Glow, those in the 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch size can be very good. They have these floats have a great action, and you don't even need any other type of spinner to get some good wobble with that type of bait. And the Spin and Glow from Warden's is also popular out west as a good alternative to a smile blade. It has buoyancy and will help keep your bait upright and up in the water column and with some action as well. So what kind of structure am I looking for when I'm fishing in the cold water season? And some of these areas here are winter staging areas that I like to concentrate on, especially in February and into March. On this particular map, this is not near the confluence of the Columbia and the Spokane River, but this particular map from the NAVIONICS webpage has an example of several different types of structures. A flat is often where you'll find fish that are active or feeding, and you can usually mark fish on your fish finder on a flat pretty efficiently without a lot of depth change. And a flat is just that. It's an area on the map that doesn't have a lot of depth change as you move out into the body of water. So you'll see the contour lines here spaced apart quite a bit. Breaks are in contrast to a flat. That's where the contour lines are very closely related together. This is often where you'll find fish that are schooled up, and a lot of times on a break, you'll have to fish slowly because, especially in the cold water season, fish that are located on a break may not be all that active. And points, especially points on the main lake and points that are significant and large, can hold fish as well. And I have that denoted here by the arrow. So here's an example of how I would consider working some of this structure. If our current is flowing from right to left in this example, one way that I may look at orienting my boat and making a trolling pass on my first pass would be to work this flat. And typically in the cold water time frame, 35 feet is one of the depths that I will typically start at. And I'll make some small S turns along 35 feet, working my boat about plus or minus 5 feet along that 35-foot contour. If I don't catch any fish on that first pass, I'll bump out into 45 feet of water and repeat. Other trolling strategies that I may employ is working a point with a trolling pass like number 3, where I'm moving along the break line of that point and then moving into some of the shallower waters, which would be on the point or a small flat like that. And number 4, my trolling pattern would be working the point and coming on down into deeper water and working that break and edge. All along while I'm working these trolling patterns, if I get a bite, if I mark a significant amount of fish, or if I catch a fish, I'll lay a waypoint down. And I'm pretty liberal about putting waypoints down when I'm fishing because I like to see if there I can determine any patterns while I'm fishing. And the next day, when I'm cleaning up my boat, a lot of times I'll go into my fish finder and I will clean up a lot of some of the clutter there, but I will make it a point of naming my waypoints while my fishing day is fresh in my memory. And I like to put a date on my waypoints and mark it with the lake elevation. So for in this example, if I went fishing on March 24th and the lake elevation was 1267, I would name my waypoints as such. And I believe that's a very important way to catalog patterns for catching walleyes. And when the lake elevation in Lake Roosevelt is so variable in the spring, having a catalog of these lake elevations where you catch fish can be a really valuable asset as you start to build these waypoints over the years. So let's take a look at the confluence of the Spokane River and the main river of the Columbia, which make up Lake Roosevelt. Before you even go fishing, I think it's an important aspect to locate areas of flats and points, river channels, and other areas that may concentrate walleyes before you even leave. This is especially important if you're unfamiliar with a body of water. And with Lake Roosevelt or any other reservoir that has variable water levels, taking a look at the lake elevation can be another important aspect of using your lake maps, because in this particular instance, the lake elevation is about 1256 feet. Full pool of Lake Roosevelt is around 1288. So you do the math, you're looking for points and flats that are approximately 30 feet below full pool, and pinpoint these areas before you even go on your fishing trip and have a plan. There's a little bit more about what the typical Lake Roosevelt drawdown is in the late winter and into the spring. Since Lake Roosevelt's purpose, or one of their main purposes, is flood control, uh, dam operators and lake and water management officials will draw the lake down to make room for mountain snowmelt entering the system. This drawdown typically begins in early to mid-February and often bottoms out in late April or early May. And coincidentally, late April and early May is usually a peak period for walleye spawning. So here's an example of the current water year with the black line compared to last year's water year, which is the pink dashed line. And you can see a pretty significant difference here. This image was created on March 26th, I believe. And there's about 20-foot difference between what we saw last year at this time and what we have going on right now. And there can be some pretty drastic changes. Looking at this chart, which compared the years 2016 to 2017. During these years in late March, we were dealing with water levels down in the low 1250s. Here's a comparison of what's gone on in the last 8 years or so. You can see 2021 is significantly higher on March 27th than it was compared to any of the other years that I have on this chart. So some of the walleye behaviors, and I can confirm this by a fishing trip that I had last week, are much different than what they may have been a year or two ago. With a higher water level and less current, we're seeing walleyes moving into the spawning areas a lot earlier than we typically see. Other variables other than lake level that can dictate what walleyes are doing is water temperature, for one. The amount of current, and this year has been a good example of that. Without the drawdown, there's not a whole lot of current in some of the areas where we're going further upstream. Weather changes can also impact how walleyes behave and how the fishing is. And water clarity is something that I've already mentioned, but stained water, walleyes may not enter the Spokane arm if the water is too muddy, and the bite may be off even if the walleyes are in that muddy water because they don't see or react to the bait very well. So early spring presentations, I talked a lot about slow trolling in this seminar here. And I believe that is one of the best and most effective ways to locate fish and locate schools of fish. And it can be an effective way to catch them. But if you locate high concentrations of fish, slow trolling may not be the most efficient way to catch walleyes. You may want to switch over to a jigging presentation or use a reaction bait like a blade bait to stay tight to the school and fish with pinpoint accuracy. So thank you. This is the Spokane Walleye Club. If you live anywhere in North Idaho or Eastern Washington, I encourage you to check us out on SpokaneWalleyeClub.com. And if you're interested in any of the resources that I've used to help build this presentation, I have them listed here, as well as some of the other videos that we've created this spring since we've been unable to meet in person due to the current global pandemic. So thanks again for tuning in, and hope to see you out on the water. Thank you.